what happens there is that each person might feel like they're not being fully heard yet, and their own experience has been bad in its own unique ways. Because as soon as someone says, well, I went through this, but the other person says, well, but I went through this, and then the other one says, but I did, no one is actually getting the satisfaction of really feeling heard and believed. So they're just going to keep going back and forth.
Right. Well, before we get started, there may be some people out there who have just left a group who are freaked out about their experience. And I've just put together a few quick pointers if that is your situation. So we're going to do that before we do anything else. First point is find safety. If necessary, that means call law enforcement to protect you. Then make a comfortable space and sleep until you feel refreshed. And it might take weeks before your sleep pattern comes back. And you may find that your sleep pattern is at a different time of the day from what you thought it was. I, for one, I wake at noon after 8 hours sleep. Have medical and dental checkups. That's often been left behind. Don't meditate or do any cult learned exercises. If you start panicking, breathe deeply and slowly to feel calmer. You can actually, by using chewing gum, preferably sugar-free and plastic-free, that can lower anxiety. It lowers cortisol in the system because you're salivating. For at least a couple of weeks, 2 weeks, cut out refined sugar and eat a low-carb diet with plenty of greens, vegetables, seeds, nuts, legumes, some fruit, and low animal fat, which includes dairy fats. And preferably use extra virgin olive oil every day. Then exercise, stretching, even when you're sitting or lying down, walking, cycling, swimming. Find friendly people to talk with and avoid people who are aggressive towards you. Talk about your favorite life experiences. Make time to take time. Watch movies, read books, listen to music, and especially listen to music. Do something creative that you enjoy doing. And finally, when you've done all of that, if you need to do that, read this book. And here is the author of the book, my good friend Rachel Bernstein. Hi, Rachel.
Oh, hello, John A. Tech. It is so nice to speak with you. And that list is that you started with is so important and meaningful in that that's where everything needs to start.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad our conversation started with the necessary ingredients to be able to land in a safer way in a world that is unknown to you at times, overwhelming, scary. Because without fortifying yourself in these ways, nothing else feels possible. So
Yeah.
I think, yes, in a very meaningful way, in terms of chronology, really lovely model for our conversation. So thank
I
you for
wrote it
that.
last night in the small hours of the morning. I thought,
Yes,
let's
good.
get this in.
Yes.
And we'll perhaps put that up in the description. I'll certainly put it on my website, which is johnatac.co.uk. Now, we've been in this business for a little while, you and I, and we've known each other
Mm-hmm.
for a little while too.
Yes, yes.
There are very few people in what people call the counter cult world. I'm not happy with that term, but let's go with it. There are very few people who whose work I absolutely support and trust, having been around here for 42 years now. And you are certainly one of them, one of that number. And what
Mm,
you've done is you've
mm,
put together a systematic approach to deconstructing the effects that authoritarian groups have upon their members. This
hmm
is a problem that is far larger than most people realize. I would say the vast majority of people have had some kind of authoritarian abusive experience, including all of the inhabitants of North Korea, for example, that this is a commonplace in our society. People have been in abusive relationships whether it's familial or in an intimate relationship or in a cult, so-called cult group, a destructive
Mm.
cult group.
Yeah.
I thought we
Yeah.
might start, if it's all right with you, with a little bit of your background, because often, people really aren't qualified to be
Mhm.
doing this. There are a lot of people out there who are saying, we can help you. We're experts. We know things. And when I find myself talking to them, I've had so many people who said they were experts on Scientology. And I get to the third paragraph of what they've written and go, you haven't
Mm.
got a clue. you know, but people set themselves up as experts. I know that you are an expert. So
Mhm.
could you
Mm.
tell our audience a little bit about your background in terms of your training, your qualification, and how you came to this work? And I know that that could take
Sure.
a long
Yeah,
time, but
sure thing. Yeah, no, I'll try to keep it brief. I don't often talk about myself anyway, so I usually keep it brief. It's not
mm,
my comfort zone.
no.
Um, when w- one of the things that I was raised with was this idea of tikkun olam and
Mm,
making the world a better place.
yes. Which is
So
a maxim
doing
within the Jewish religion. Yeah.
yes, right,
It's Hebrew,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah, it's Hebrew. And I was raised, I mean, in a family separate from a synagogue, but I loved my rabbi, Rabbi Schulweis, who you who used to talk about predicate theology, which was therefore. Now we're
Mm,
learning how to treat each other,
yeah.
and that's not a period. That's comma. Therefore, we might want to feed people and let's take care of this and let's
Mm,
do this and let's do that. And I remember actually, as a side note, my dad, one time we were in synagogue. We didn't go to synagogue all that much, but we were in synagogue and there was a side door that didn't have a plate on it or a knob or anything, so you didn't know which side of it opened. And there was an elderly man who tried to push the door open, but it was in the hinged side,
mm,
and he hurt his shoulder. And my dad said, "I'll be right back." And he left services and went to a hardware store and got a plate and with glue and affixed it onto the door in the middle of services. And I thought, that's what I was raised with. Okay,
mm,
something needs to be done. Let's take care of it right now.
yeah.
I know with traditional Jews, you're not supposed to drive on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to have gone into a store, but he was like tikkun olam, like what
Mm,
it's sort of the golden rule in synagogue. So let's take care of business. So there, so that kind of leaning in
mm,
is is the persona that I got to be around with my mom, my dad, my relatives, my ancestors. What I noticed after a loved one got involved in Scientology, and I was in middle school, I think, it became dinner table conversation. Well, how does this happen? How can this person transform in front of our eyes, or even not, but just transform? Um, and justify what's happening, sort of make it okay, make it make sense in their minds in a way that they don't with anything else. What is this creature that
mm,
this thing, this entity that can get in under people's skin? And then when I was studying education, I was noticing in my undergrad cults all around me. I was noticing the front groups. This was in Boston.
yeah.
And, sometimes when you hear these stories from parents, you think they're being paranoid and you think they're saying, oh, things are happening, like there are going to be drug dealers around every corner. Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, not really. But I learned about these front groups existing on college campuses, and there they were.
Mm,
And I thought, oh my goodness, this is really a thing. People are sending their kids off to school only to have them stolen. Uh, and um, and then when I was studying right after to become a therapist, I noticed in my program there was a teacher who was studying a group therapy. Sorry, she was teaching a group therapy class, and she ran it like a cult. And it was alarming.
mm,
It was truly alarming. And I remember getting into it, studying it, then telling the dean all about what I had noticed. And she no longer taught that class, or I think taught anything.
Oh, well
But
done.
it was really amazing to see in real time, but also it was alarming to see how people could get involved in it with a therapist,
Mm.
someone who is a licensed person, and it doesn't matter, even if you have initials after your name. It depends what your ego needs are and what your personality disorder is that you're bringing to
Yeah.
that therapeutic relationship, unfortunately.
Mm.
So then I was off and running, and then I got a job working at the cult clinic, which is now no longer. It was part of Jewish Family Service in LA and was shuttered by Scientology pressure, but then was harassed by Scientology, and they dressed up like janitorial staff and were trying to go through my client records. Luckily, everything was locked, but you could see they were trying to pry open the the cabinets, um, trying just to do everything they could to get into my support groups. Um, Complained to my board, had me followed. Eugene Ingram was my
Eugene
shadowy figure
Ingram.
after
Yeah.
me for a while, right?
Mm.
Charming fella.
Yeah, lovely man.
Uh,
Thrown out of
and
the
I,
LAPD, everybody,
yeah,
so that
uh-huh,
Scientologist David Miscavige could hire him.
amazing.
Mm.
And anyway, I stayed home for a little bit, scared. I did, and then
Mm.
I heard my dad had already passed, unfortunately, when I was 22. But I heard his voice. Not actually. We don't need medication, but it's an embodied sort of spirit
Mm.
of his where he said,
Mm.
"You can't let the bullies win."
Mm.
And I said, "Okay." So then I was back at work. So that's sort of how that all
Mm.
began. But in terms of my education, I have to say, yes, I went to school,
Mm.
but this behind me, this has been my school, meeting with clients,
Mm.
recording what they say, learning what works, what doesn't,
Mm.
being open to seeing how I said something that would have been okay in a different support group, but not with a former cult member support group, and
Mm.
taking notes, remembering.
Mm.
Um, so my clients have trained me, and taught me
Mm.
so much. And you just have to listen. You just have to be open to it. You have to come in saying, there's only so much I know, because I've had my life experiences, but I haven't had those
Mm.
experiences. And so let me learn about what that's like and what they need now and what
Mm.
works and what doesn't. Yeah, I'm glad I have all these books on my shelf and I've learned about different forms and techniques of therapy, but it's it has to be fine-tuned. And there were no programs for that.
Mm.
And still only now one that I know of, which is wonderful. But yeah, this was my university behind me, and it was really important.
Yeah, let me again stress that, I've been doing this off and on for 42 years, and I've met a lot of therapists. I've met a lot of people who thought they were helping. And I think there are various things. I think the first thing is I am sure there is such a thing as a therapeutic personality. If you don't like people, if you don't
Mm.
care about people, and as is sometimes the case with people who are established in psychotherapy, you have the narcissistic personality disorder, you won't do anybody any good, or it'll be accidental. So I think the
Right.
first thing is actually having a care and concern for other
Mm-hmm.
people, which you quite evidently do have. I
Mm.
didn't realize that your story was so caught up with Scientology. It's strange after all these years we've never talked about
Yes.
that. Mine too,
Yeah.
as I think everybody knows.
Yes. Oh, yes,
But
I've heard. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
but beyond that, I mean, I worked with Christian Churko, who again is somebody whom I have the most tremendous regard. I've
Mm-hmm.
had something to do with the recovery of about 600 people, most of them from Scientology. I've met with Krishnas,
Wow.
Rajneeshis, Moonies, and people of fixed opinions generally. You know, I, an
Mm-hmm.
anecdote.
Mm-hmm.
I met this guy 30 years ago, and he told me that he hadn't talked to his sister for 2 years because she was a druggie. And so I sat and watched him drink 5 whiskeys while I drank orange juice. And I
Wow.
said, well, what drug? And I was sort of expecting he was going to say, she's a heroin addict or, crack cocaine. And he said, she smoked cannabis.
Okay.
And I had a conversation with him. And the next day he phoned his sister. And it's sort of that those cultic ways of thinking, that way of I don't have to deal with this because
Mm-hmm.
it's his sister,
Mm-hmm.
this matters.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so people can, go off into a strange way of thinking. And
Yeah.
getting to the place where you can help them, you have to know they're there. You have to know there's a human being in the room. And again, you have
Right.
people. Uh, I had an assistant for some years who was quite remarkable. And her husband, they were born again Christians. And her husband said, the great thing about her working with you is that we'll be able to lead people to Jesus. And I said, if I hear one more word like that, we're done. This is not
Yeah.
about anything other than helping people to decide for themselves if they want to continue their involvement with the group,
Mm-hmm.
to decide
Mm-hmm.
for themselves what they want to think. And they may never have done that before in their lives, but it is the independence of mind, the freedom of mind that is significant. And that's something I recognize in Christian's
Mm-hmm.
work, and it's something I recognize in your work, that you liberate the person.
Mm.
Not so, I mean, you must have had this question. People will turn to me and they'll say, but what do you believe, John? And I have to then explain that they really don't want to believe what I believe. The mess I've made of my life would not do them any good, whatsoever. Um, so, you know, uh, letting people come, learn how to arrive at conclusions if they haven't. So, um, what's your actual qualifications? What have you
Mm-hmm.
got on the bits of paper? You have a master's degree, yes?
Oh, yes. So I have a bachelor's in education, and then I have two master's degrees. I have a master's in education and master's also in counseling psychology.
Hmm.
Not clinical, but counseling, sort of the interactive uh, piece of it. I really wanted to learn to do that work. And it's interesting because so I have yes, so I have an MSED and a master's in counseling, in marriage and family therapy.
Hmm.
So there are a lot of initials, but I just put MSED and then LMFT, MOUSE, whatever else I need to put at the end. But yeah. I mean, it's good to have those qualifications. It's also interesting to see how much uh, how much I kind of go in between my different degrees
Hmm.
in the work that I do. I mean, when I learned to do education, I was also doing um, training in special ed and
Hmm.
learning how to teach people who had different ways of learning,
Yeah.
which has been invaluable.
Hmm.
Um, so that I know that for some clients, we just do a little bit at a time. Like, how
Hmm.
much can someone take in? How much, if they're going through a period of really being overwhelmed, scared,
Hmm.
there's only so much that they can take in. There's only so much they're going to imprint
Yeah.
also, and know where to put it so they can retrieve it for later
Hmm.
because their adrenaline is flowing. So some people need things in bite-sized pieces,
Hmm.
and a session only every other week, and they need time to kind of have, have it be different for a different cadence.
Hmm.
Um, there are some people who have trouble sitting. They don't want to be in an office with a closed door. We go for a walk or we sit on a bench. Um, or I make sure to have them have a session when there's no one else in this suite so that
Hmm.
I can just leave the door open and they'll still have privacy. Because why not? I mean, why be rigid about those things, and feel like someone needs to be this square peg in a round hole. Why? They
Mm.
already have that in the world outside. That should be the last thing they have to worry about in therapy. But I know there are a lot of therapists who are rigid in their way, and you have to fit into their way. And I've never quite understood that. I think it's a different temperament. I don't know if I judge it. It's a different temperament. You need to have a little more flexibility.
I couldn't agree more. It said that Freud, in fact, couldn't stand people looking at him, and that's why he sat behind the couch.
Oh, wow.
Let me tell you,
I
my other,
didn't.
I don't like Freud. My other tidbit about
No,
Freud is he never
do
received
it.
a single minute of analysis. He didn't need it.
Oh, he didn't need it. Oh, how
That's right.
convenient.
Bless him.
Uh-huh.
But I could talk
Okay.
about that for hours because I detest the man. But but I'm not going to. Um,
Wow.
Christian Shurko tends
Okay.
to most usually have his meetings with people in play parks. He finds that people relax if they're in a children's playground. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like you, he will
Mm-hmm.
find
Nice.
situations
Yeah.
because you are looking to establish trust and set the person at ease.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the thing I am only ever have only ever I'm not involved at all anymore, really, other than remotely. But my I have been an information counselor rather than a process counselor. So it's largely for me a
Mm-hmm.
matter of
Mm-hmm.
finding out what the person doesn't know about the group that they need to know and that they
Right.
can then think
Right.
with. But what you've produced is a book that gets to the process that says these things, this is something that's probably happened to you. Think about it. You know, go over this and you
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's very systematic. I went all the way through it last night, restart and
Mm.
restore.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I think it's gentle. You're pointed at the right places. And it's worth saying, I mean, a friend told me that he was advising people who'd been involved in the dreadful Nixium group with Keith
Yeah.
Raniere. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, it will take you a long time to
Mm-hmm.
recover. And he said to me, he told them this. And I said, what are you doing? It will take as long as it takes. I've had people, I mean, my own experience, for 9 years, I was a customer of Scientology, what they call public. And it meant that I wasn't abused
Yeah.
or humiliated. And so my recovery was relatively easy. It still
Yeah.
took months because it is more invasive than any other group I've met. It reconstructs the whole way you
Mm-hmm.
perceive the world
Mm-hmm.
and changes your internal reality control, your sense of what reality is. But
Mm-hmm.
so it took me about 6 months to stop staring at things, that's the training routine zero. But that
Right.
was the worst bit. I didn't have any trauma to go through. And I've had situations, I've had two situations, curiously, where I received letters that said, 15 years ago, I talked with you for an afternoon. And it was a turning point.
Wow.
And so sometimes somebody
Yeah.
can get onto the road to recovery, which I think is often the starting point is often realizing that the guru was fallible, realizing that the guru
Mm.
said something. Often you can do it with Sun Myung Moon quite easily, or with Rajneesh, or with Hubbard. You find a contradiction in the text and you say,
Mm-hmm.
well, Ron
Mm-hmm.
Hubbard said he was a wounded war hero, but he also said that on July the 25th, 1945, he was in Hollywood and he beat up three petty officers, though he was meant to be hospitalized and crippled and blinded. I often get quite interesting responses to that. I remember somebody telling me, well, he had two bodies, obviously, which was, I hadn't really thought it through. Of course he did. How silly of me.
Right? No, John. Why? Right.
I'm
Exactly.
just not that bright. But
No,
sometimes
no, no. You have to work on that. That's a lot of people say that about you, John. You're
it's
just not
true.
that bright.
It is
Yeah,
true.
right. Yeah, I'm sure.
But I
Not.
do my best. It may be too late for me. Um, but there, some people are very resilient. In looking at, say, George
Hmm.
Bonanno's fascinating work on PTSD, and he's gained more and more
Mm,
support because I think there's been a bit too much of an emphasis on you'll have this condition, which is of course not a definable condition. PTSD
right,
has
right.
what 633,000 possible symptom combinations, where major depression has 277. So you're dealing with
Oh my goodness.
a grab bag already when you start using this term. But some people are resilient. It
Yeah,
doesn't matter
yeah.
what you do to them. It's like the guy who was in Dachau, and when he left, he went home and he lived in Dachau. And his friends said, "How can you stay here?" And he said, "This is where I live." So for some people,
Yeah.
they have a different attitude.
Hmm. Hmm.
So allowing the person to be in charge of their recovery, and again, by having the book here, they can pick it up, they can go so far, and then they can, think, well, that's good, and then they can come back to it, or they can work all the way through it, beginning to end. It allows them,
Right.
and again, having control, having the pace over, how much you do and how little you do is becomes an important
Hmm.
thing
Mm,
because
hmm.
so often, if somebody's been in, say, Scientology's C organization, or they've been close to Maharaji or any of a
Hmm.
5,000 of these awful people, they can't make decisions anymore. So even
Right, right,
allowing them to make a decision is
right.
a great beginning point.
Yeah, yeah,
So there was
yeah.
some,
I mean, it's what's interesting too is, yeah, about the time. I mean, that was something definitely stressed, as you saw in the journal. Like, take your time, and that's why I put together this additional this little companion notebook with some vignettes and other things. I wanted people to not feel alone, so I asked permission of some clients and some podcast guests to just send me a paragraph if their situation dovetailed with one of the sections,
mm,
so that people could say, "Oh, that's it's not just me that this has happened to," but that sometimes I wanted something a little smaller that people could just put in a backpack or
mm,
in a larger pocketbook or purse, because you never know when you're going to have a thought and you're going to want to get it out. And sometimes it's when you're on a train or wherever else.
mm,
But really to take your time. It's interesting too when you mention about people's, and then I want to, of course, come back to what you have to say about it. But when people seem less affected,
mm,
it is true. There are some people who glide by, they move on with their life, they get into the practical. They don't spend a lot of time in the emotional. They ignore a lot of the signals that are coming up to them. They kind of, it's not something they're going to check in with and let run their life. Um, a lot of these people are a little more wrinkle free, because of it. They just sort of have a way of handling things. What I have noticed, though, sometimes, and I've prepared people for this, is that the people who feel that they're fine, um, they're past it, I'll just let them know that it could happen, that there is a situation they'll find themselves in that they haven't yet, that is going to trigger something, and it's going to remind them of something, or
yeah,
it's going to be something that brings them back in some way, in an uncomfortable way. But it doesn't mean that they haven't moved past their experience in a really significant way
mm,
already, and it doesn't mean that they're not better, but however they define that. Um, but that those are opportunities to find out what's still left to work on.
yeah,
Oh, there's this piece that I haven't quite attended to, like when people are fine, they learn how to sort of go back into a workforce and deal with a
mm,
boss telling them what to do, but they haven't yet gotten into a relationship.
yeah,
So they go on the date and then they're sabotaging it and they don't know why they're doing that. And so that along the way, as we have more life experiences, and I hope for people to have those, where they get back into the world, they just might find there's still a little bit more to work on that they didn't know yet
mm,
was there to work on. And that's all that means.
yeah.
and that I tell people they know where to find me, and it's not regressive for them to come in to meet with me. It's actually still part of their progress. So to not put themselves down, because some people, of course, will do that, and it's a shame.
Yeah, without wanting to advertise Kubler-Ross, because I don't swallow the whole of what's being taught there. The stages of grieving
Yeah.
can be very relevant to leaving a cult, and it's easy.
Hmm.
I know far too many people who are actually in denial. So they would, listening to what we've just said, they'd say, I'm resilient. So I don't
Yeah.
have these problems. But what's actually, you
Right.
can see them acting out the behaviors of the group. The,
Mm.
the simplest of these behaviors is bullying, people who
Yes.
are bullying.
Right.
Then you can see them moving into the next stage after denial, which is they get angry about it. And we have this peculiar situation at the moment that there are some
Yeah.
extraordinarily popular ex-members. Um, so, for example, was his name Lloyd Evans? Is that what he called himself? Who was a Jehovah's Witness, who had a massive
Right.
following, and then was pulled down by a scandal. And I met him 10 years ago,
Oh
and
my.
he just seemed to me. He was over in England. I met him briefly, and he just seemed to me to be somebody who wanted an audience. He did not seem to me to be somebody who'd
Mm.
understood at all what had happened to him or was happening
Hmm.
to other people. And
Hmm.
so he had a podcast with 150,000 people on it. And there are these podcasts which are kind of anger fests. They're places where people can talk about their abuse, and it's a good idea that the world should know about the abuses in these groups. But unfortunately, they're not getting beyond the anger. I had this guy called Carlos Cornier, who was he's now a percussionist in Chicago with Funkadesi, great band, and but he was then a filmmaker when I met him, and he said he'd been in the Sea Org, and we were working on this little project together, and he said that he'd been in the rehabilitation project force, so the
Mm.
gulag, the labor
Yeah.
force.
Ugh.
Not allowed to talk to anybody, have to run between your jobs. You do the menial things like cleaning the toilets. And you're basically being tamed and broken so that you'll be completely obedient. You have to wear black, all of this. And he's there in Florida, having been demeaned and put down to this. And there was a protest. And one of the protesters spat at him. And it's this
Mm.
attitude of mind. It's like, you belong to this group, therefore you're the enemy. One of the things,
Mm.
I've
Hmm.
very publicly complained about Jamie Mustard and his book Child X, which I
Mm.
read from cover to cover, and I posted a review on Amazon because he is actually in the text saying that anybody that was not born into Scientology is a devil. Anybody who was recruited and has left, it's their fault that he feels pain. And sort of going, you need some help. Now he's selling a
Hmm.
method of injecting anesthetic into the stellate ganglia in the neck to cure PTSD,
Oh no.
sadly with the support of Gabor Mate. So it can happen that you start getting this contest, this kind of, well, if you chose to be a member of this group, you weren't born into it, so therefore it's your fault what happened in the group. He's got no focus on helping the
Mm.
4,000 current Sea Organization slaves. Nothing. He's not interested in that. He's still roiling around in his own distress, which is absolutely unsurprising because he was treated abominably. He was born in Scientology. His mother and father gave him up to the Scientology nursery. He was born in
Mm.
1970, and in the 70s, that was just one of the awful
Mm.
places. But again, he's gone public and said, "Oh, nobody's ever talked about this." And I'm sort of, I published a book in 1990 that talks about the scorpions at the ranch where the children were. I have spoken about it many times. But there's a
Mm.
point where the trauma, the hurt becomes so much that
Right.
people just want to attack. They want to put up an enemy. And explaining that the enemy is not Scientologists, or
Right.
Munis or Krishnas, what have you.
Hmm.
It's not even the leader of the
Hmm.
group, though I do believe that the leader of the group should be restrained and usually sent to criminal trial. It's the belief system that while you still believe these
Hmm.
things, and unfortunately in denial, what will happen is people may find other ways of talking about, randomity, reasonableness, or dev-t, but they
Right.
still
Right.
believe the same things. So they swap karma for the overt motivator sequence. They swap
Right.
reincarnation
Right.
for past lives without understanding that in Hinduism and Buddhism, reincarnation is the fear of the eternal return. As the Buddhists say, you are on the wheel of suffering. Whereas the Scientology attitude is, oh,
Mm.
I'll do it in my next lifetime. They don't, they're not perceiving what this means or why it's significant.
Hmm.
And they're also willing to accept very slight evidence to support their strange beliefs. But they're not they're not expanding their thinking. They're kind of going, well, I don't use the words anymore, so therefore I don't believe.
Hmm.
And it's
Hmm.
just another way of
Hmm.
denying, and often a way of othering people so that you can say, well, the people who are in Scientology now are all bad. When anonymous, picketed
Right.
Scientology organizations, I've talked to people who were in those organizations at that time. It did not help them. It terrified them that there were
Yes.
people outside
Mm.
with V for Vendetta masks on, shouting at them. With the best will in the world and with the best
Right.
intention, it did no
Right.
good for those people. It didn't say, come on out and we'll help you, which is the message we need to have.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, people are sometimes choosing, well, or misdirecting their anger, and similar to, soldiers coming back after fighting in Vietnam and being called baby killers, and that there are a lot of people who will take out their anger, their frustration on the
Mm,
ones who are just right in front of them, the ones who represent something.
mm,
But that people are victims in this story on so many different levels. I think also that though that there is this interesting thing that I've noticed that happens in cults. It also happens in uh, abusive households,
mm.
where people are needing for their survival, needing to be competitive. Um, because unless they maintain their
Mm.
status, their stats,
Get their stats
they
up.
will
Yeah.
fall and fall hard.
Mm,
Yeah, right. And maybe to never return to, where they were, and they didn't get where they were easily. And so, people will come out sometimes thinking, I still need to hold on to this. And so, if I can tear someone down, if I can keep myself afloat, I'm going to do it. And sometimes you almost have to remind people that the war is over, that they don't actually
mm,
need to do this any longer, that the
mm,
system necessitated that, but that they can actually lay down their arms
mm,
and just breathe. And they don't quite believe it, as most people wouldn't, who've been trained to be hypervigilant and nervous in
mm,
that way for many years. Um, they're sure that as soon as they lay down their arms, they're going to be vulnerable and they're going to be attacked and they're going to be knocked down. And so it takes a lot to have them believe that message. They have to kind of see it in practice over and over.
mm,
Um, but I know that I've tried in a Solomonic way to bring people together who are, uh, newly in Scientologists with second gens. It can be hard. I think what happens there is that each person might feel like they're not being fully heard yet in their own experience has been bad in its own unique ways. Because as soon as someone says, well, I went through this, but the other person says, well, but I went through this, then and then the other one says, but I did. No one is actually getting the satisfaction of really feeling heard and believed. So they're just going to keep going back and forth. And it's like what I teach sometimes with couples. Don't just say, yeah, me too. Listen, just listen, stop, listen, take in what the person is saying, have the entire conversation be about what they brought up. You can take a turn next, but make sure they feel heard and understood and acknowledged. Then they'll have a reservoir, hopefully, to be able to give to you. But don't just keep pulling back and forth. But, part of that is people's training and nervousness about losing their status.
Yeah, and we are. I mean, I saw it in the Moonies. I talked with a young man a few years ago who told me that he'd hated Steve Hassan because Steve
Mm.
had chosen to join the Moonies. And then he met Steve and found that
Oh,
he was not the ogre he'd thought him to be, but he was like,
right,
I was born
right.
into it. I had no choice. Steve had a choice,
Mm.
and he was stupid enough to take that choice.
Wow, right.
Jamie Mustard, in his book, twice refers to Maoist brainwashing techniques in Scientology, but doesn't seem to realize they work. So it's
Uh-huh.
not a matter of, oh, come and join this wonderful movement. You were lied to join it. You're deceived.
Mhm.
And again, this is something that profoundly bothers me, that I've spent a lot of time on trying to show how Hubbard created a system that would enslave people psychologically. So
Mm.
30
Mhm.
years ago, I wrote a paper called Never Believe a Hypnotist, which is a quotation from Ron Hubbard. He said we should never believe a hypnotist, and then he admitted to being a hypnotist. And in that paper, I went
Uh-huh.
through the first 2 years of his publications, showing that he talks about how you
Mhm.
would do this to somebody. And when you look later on
Mm.
at Scientology, I mean, there's a specific, very strong example in his first published book, Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health, or Mental
Mm.
Science of Modern Health, depending how you think about it.
Uh-huh.
He said that there was, you use a technique which will lead to fluttering of the eyelids as the person enters what he calls reverie, which is what hypnotists call light trance. A year later, in the book Science of Survival in June 1951, he cancelled this technique. He said this technique is hypnotic. He admits that the basic technique of the Dianetic Book One method is hypnotic, and he cancels it
Wow.
for that reason. In 1977, it was reintroduced, and it's been used ever since. So you've got a clear and plain admission of this, but that's just the entry technique. When you start looking at the 2,000 or so techniques, you are being progressively led away from reality. And one of the commonplaces among ex-members is they'll say, well, the early stuff's good. The training routines are fine. They're really helpful. And you're going, no. When Steve Hassan first saw the training routines demonstrated, which was by Hannah and Jerry Whitfield, he said, this is the most
Um,
overt use of hypnosis I've ever seen in a cult. And Steve is very highly trained in hypnotherapy, so he knows what he's talking about. When he tried to make that
right.
point on Aftermath to Mike Rinder and Leah Remini, they just looked at him blankly. And Mike said, it isn't hypnotism. And it's sort of, well, until you know what hypnotism is and what's going
Right.
on, then and Hubbard has implanted this idea in his followers that it's the opposite of hypnotism. But when you say, well, what is hypnotism and how does it work? They haven't got a clue. They've just got a thought terminating cliche that means they don't have to think about that. And there is for me this terrible problem. I wrote more than 30 pieces for Tony Ortega's Underground Bunker to explain the implanting
Mm.
system that Hubbard used. And you know, I've spoken with so many people over the years who say we can deal with any group except for Scientology. Scientology is too elaborate, it's too complicated. We just get lost trying to
Wow.
deal with these people because it
Hmm.
is such a sophisticated system, way beyond what was happening in the Maoist camps, way beyond what MK Ultra managed to do. Hubbard did manage to program people to take over the way you think. And the reluctance amongst ex-members to understand the history of the movement, the biography of their founder,
Mm-hmm.
or how the
Mm-hmm.
techniques work astonishes
Mm-hmm.
me. That it's sort of an invisible wall has been built that stops people from thinking about what they believe. So I've long recommended that groups of ex-members get together, take a paragraph from an L. Ron Hubbard book and discuss it. And I did this
Mm-hmm.
once myself, but realized I'm the person that can't be in the room because everybody looks at me and goes, well, you're the expert. But what I did was I got 12
Uh,
people we had 210 years of experience of Scientology between us. I started at my left, so I wouldn't be the first, and I said, tell me a time when you've used the 8 dynamics: survival for self, survival for the family, survival for the group, survival for mankind, and on through to survival
mm-hmm.
for God, the 8th dynamic. Tell me a time when you've used that to solve a problem. I went around the whole room. Nobody had ever even tried to use this fundamental model of Scientology. That fascinated me. And then it was easy to deconstruct and say, well, you get one vote, the 8 billion members of humanity get one vote. There's something
Right,
that's
right.
just mathematically not working in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's good for
Mm-hmm.
me, it's good for the wife and kids, it's good for my pet rock. And if you actually believe in God, you can forget about the other 7 dynamics. You can't do something that goes against the will of the God you believe in. But
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
have been met with blank stares explaining that to Scientologists, former members. It's they don't get that the programming, the positive suggestions, the implants, the commands, as Aaron Hubbard called them, are the teachings of Ron Hubbard. And that if you look at, you know, if you increase communication, affinity will always increase. A basic principle. Yeah. So if you shout at somebody, they'll
Mm-hmm.
like you more. It doesn't even take a lot of thinking, but getting people to talk about it and think about it releases them from, that underlying structure of commands of programming. I hate the word programming. I hate comparing us to computers, but for the moment, it's shorthand and it will do. So
Right,
having
right.
people talk
Yeah.
about it. Um,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
would you like to reflect on that before I go somewhere else?
Yeah. Talking about it is a very interesting thing because when I notice that there are blank stares, I'll wonder why, and
Mm,
sometimes I'll wonder out loud with that person about
mm,
why. What is it about taking this in
yeah.
that might be hard, that might be devastating,
Mm,
that might be unnerving? I mean, however you would describe it, but that it becomes yet another thing that you have to really look at that was done on purpose
mm,
to you, that was disarming you, that was affecting your brain in a way without your consent, without your knowledge. It it is, you know, doing this to people is sort of it's so disrespectful. I mean, I think when I'm doing the journal, part
mm,
of when I looked at other journals, I saw, yes, there are workbooks, and I
mm.
love Jilly's workbook.
This is Jilly
There are
Jenkinson.
some,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
Julie Jenkinson, and she's lovely. She's
She
very
is
funny
lovely.
too.
Yeah.
I remember hanging, yeah. Um, and but other journals, it's just a place to write, and I like, if I can, to offer a little bit of this is what happened and this is how this
Mm,
happens, and to take it off of the person being responsible for their own issues,
mm,
for getting them into this situation because they didn't do it on their own. um, but I think it is really respectful
mm,
to say, let's have a moment where you learn what this was, not only what this was, but why someone would feel the need to do this to you. Like why they want to get rid of your reactive mind. What is it about the reactive mind that is so powerful and sometimes so accurate that it threatens the person who wants to have ultimate say over how things should affect you and if they should affect you.
Mm.
And so to not only understand what happened, but why that was important
Mm.
for a cult leader to take away from you, or for your manipulative partner to take away from you, or to make you think, what do they have to gain by doing this to you? So I feel like it is an important thing when you're noticing the blank stares, and sometimes that does happen when I bring something up, and I'll just say, what would it be like for you to take that in,
Mm.
to really look at that in the way that I'm talking about it?
Mm.
Um, would that be too hard? Is there a part of you that's sort of thinking, I don't know if I'm ready? Maybe we can revisit that another time.
Yeah. I mean, it's the advantage of a one-on-one conversation that, as soon as you see any indication that the person disagrees with you or can't understand or take in what you're saying, you can see
Yeah.
that because they're in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
you can ask,
Yeah.
and lead
Yeah.
them to something that's useful. It surprises me the lack of curiosity that there are people who are interested in what David Miscavige had for breakfast, but they're not interested in how Hubbard devised Scientology. And when you get to that,
Mm.
so for example, in January 1949, writing a letter from Savannah, Georgia, L. Ron Hubbard announced to his literary agent, Forry Ackerman, who gave me the letter, that he had discovered this new method that was going to make an enormous amount of money. He hadn't decided yet whether he was going to take over the Catholic Church. He talked about selling the Arroyo Seco to people, the dry riverbed in LA, like selling Brooklyn
Yeah.
Bridge. And he
Right.
said, with these techniques, you can rape women and they'll know nothing about it. Now, that is the enunciation of Dianetics. And
Oh.
so when you start talking about what was the motivation, Hubbard himself in 1968, a man called Charlie Nairn, made what is as yet the most important documentary about Scientology, The Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard. It has the only hostile interview of Hubbard. Charlie told me that before the camera went on, which was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and see Hubbard sitting and blinking and, really in no control whatsoever over the situation, this great man who taught about public relations. But before the camera
Yeah.
went on, Charlie actually put it to him that it was a scam. And Hubbard went, yeah. And he said, and it must be really difficult for you having to keep that to yourself and not let on. Charlie had got that natural sort of ability that narcissists will
Oh.
fall for. And Hubbard
Mm-hmm.
was,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's really hard. I have a hard life. And so Charlie said to him, why do you do it? And said, well, firstly, it's nice to, this is 1968, it's nice to say to your wife at the end of every day, we made another $10,000, which I think works out at $150,000 in today's money, something like that. Every day to be able to
Mm.
say, we made all this money. He died with $648 million in assets, all of it taken from Scientologists, every last dime. So
Mm.
nice to be able to do that. But the main reason is that I like to catch the clever ones and reel them in. And when Charlie told me that some years ago now, it was like, so when he was 10 years old, he was overweight, he was spotty, he was not liked. Russell Miller
Mm.
and I got interviews with people who knew him at that time and documents about that time.
Mm.
He's getting revenge on the rest of the world. His whole trip is
Right.
power over other people. And when you find out the sadistic things, like putting a 4-year-old child, Derek Green, into the chain locker aboard his ship, this tiny little fetid, stinking hole, for 3 days in absolute darkness until he stopped whimpering.
Mm.
Yeah. This is the founder of the religion of Scientology. So it amazes me that people aren't fascinated to know that they were actually involved with something that was not relieving trauma, but causing it. with a man.
Right.
I interviewed a woman who'd worked for David Miscavige, and she said when she was lucky, she got 5 hours sleep. She normally
Mm.
got two. And when I explained to her
Ooh.
that this is the point where the human brain begins to break down, if you
Yeah.
go down to less than 6 hours sleep a night, for most people, their glial cells in the
Hmm.
brain stop functioning properly, and you are never fully awake. You're always kind of, your mood will shift all over the place. It'll be very easy for somebody to control you. In fact, of all of the
Hmm.
things you can
Hmm.
do to somebody to
Hmm.
control them, deprivation of food and sleep are the two big ones. But but getting people to look at it. So you are, through the book you've written here, getting people to look at it and getting them to look particularly at the effect it's had upon them. And
Mm.
I did actually find a particular page somewhere. You have a copy there. At
Hmm.
page 159, you say that joy can coexist with grief. I wonder if you could
Hmm.
dig that page out and read us some of that, because I think it's one of hundreds of important points that you make. Page
Uh-huh.
159.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Right. There is something about fighting against the black and white thinking that happens so often in groups where a leader or a manipulator only allows you to have certain emotions, in part because I think they don't want to have to deal with taking any responsibility, or I don't know if they're even wired to have remorse. And it's like it bothers them to deal with people feeling angry or sad or
Mm,
mourning the loss of their family, or having their child taken away and sent to go live, with the other children, and that they're mourning the loss of that child. And oh, let's just get on with it because I don't want to have to deal with that.
yeah.
And so I think that people have only been allowed to feel uh, either happy or motivated, um, devoted, all the things that a controller would like.
Mm,
So people come out, I think, still they're not sure that it's okay to feel other feelings
yeah.
first. The ones that they were not allowed to feel because they see them as weaknesses, or it's Satan, whatever, the philosophy or theology of the group was. But then because there's still this application of black and white thinking that you can think one thing at a time, like there's the woman I talked to, it was fascinating to talk to her. She was raised in a cult that was on a commune that was run by her family. Her grandfather started it, so it was just her relatives in this commune. Um, they were allowed to have group emotion. You were allowed to be happy all together. That was it. Today we are going to be happy. Tomorrow we are going to be in devotion or whatever. I don't know, however
Mm,
that gets translated. And so she used everyone else as a gauge for how to feel,
mm,
and didn't check in with how she felt because it didn't matter.
mm,
And so there was this permission I wanted to give people to feel the whole range of their feelings, to know that there's a reason that they have them all. And it's all to inform you.
mm,
They all have a purpose. And sometimes it's for your safety to know that you're being abused, to know that, something bad is happening to you, um, and so that you can react.
mm.
I like the reactive mind. I think it's really good. Um, and
Save, of course, that it
I
doesn't actually
think,
exist, but
right,
but
but just having a reaction that is yours.
yeah,
The idea, right? It's not a reactive mind, it's just a reaction. You can have your reaction. Yes,
yeah,
please do. Thank you. I want to know. I want
yeah,
feedback. I'm not scared
yeah,
of you having a criticism of what I'm saying, or an idea that's
mm,
different than mine. I don't need for you to ignore all that so I can have control.
exactly.
Um, and so I think having people know that sometimes what life is that we have our sadness while we have our joy.
Mm,
We have the people who we're mourning, and then the new baby that was just born into the family who we're going to go visit, but who looks like the relative who passed. So it's a little sad, it's a little happy, and that's all okay.
Mm,
And it's all the complexity of emotion, and one doesn't cancel the other one out.
mm.
It is just about being sort of giving yourself permission to feel all that we are able to feel as living beings who are participating in life emotionally.
Yeah, and it's one of many excellent points that you make. Um, of course, in Scientology, you're supposed to be tone four. You're supposed to be enthusiastic. Now, initially in Modern Science and Mental Health, Hubbard says very clearly that you should have the proper emotion for the circumstance. He actually talks about if a bear is running after you, you should be frightened, which seems good. That was
Mm-hmm.
lost very early on with the idea that
Mm-hmm.
I think it annoyed him to see people being sad and upset. And so, he didn't want to waste his time with that. And he was forceful and bullying, reading, say, Janice Gillam Grady's books.
Uh,
Janice was 11 when she was put aboard Hubbard's ship. She didn't really see her parents again because Hubbard had them doing other things and they separated. And at 12, she and her sister and her brother became the first Commodore's messengers. So her education was abandoned. And I think just the cover of her first book, which shows Hubbard grinning and walking down one of the gangways, and Janice, as a teenager, obviously petrified, obviously in this awful condition, you're sort of going, this is the man who's going to save the world. But there is this, you've got to look this certain way, you've got to behave this certain way.
mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
Scientology, very specifically, because you learn the tone scale of emotions, you then practice those emotions. You are then taught that on his scale, which is numbered, which is quite interesting, and has things on it which aren't emotions, like pain or making amends, for example. They're not actually
Mm-hmm.
emotions. But he
Mm-hmm.
has this gradation of the scale and says if you go half a tone to a tone above or below somebody, you can move their tone level. And I can remember doing these drills very early on and going, I'm not going to take somebody down. I'm not going to make somebody feel worse. So
Right.
that was one of
Right.
my resistances. But you see,
Mm-hmm.
what starts to happen when you mimic emotions enough is you lose sense of what you actually feel. It's like, Peter Sellers was not the only actor to say that he had no self. He just had the roles that he played. And I think that
Right.
process very much happens in many groups that you're expected to appear a certain way, you're expected to react a certain way. And so liberating emotion, and I think it's a tremendously important point that you make, that we do feel more than one thing at the same time, that we can feel
Mm.
distress and at the same time we can feel pleased about something. We can feel, our friend Yuval Laor says that one of the markers, and I've put this forward myself before, is humor. If Can you laugh
Mm.
about your situation? Can you laugh about
Mm-hmm.
what happened?
Mm-hmm.
Not that kind of cruel sarcasm that cult
Right.
leaders have, but
Mm-hmm.
an
Mm-hmm.
actual joyful reaction to your own folly, to to your own silliness.
Yeah.
And is it possible to, because that seriousness, that you know, rigidity of feeling, is something
Mm-hmm.
that's brought
Mm-hmm.
into the cult. It's a militaristic thing. You are not supposed to smile. You are not supposed to, you know, at the wrong moment. You're not
Right.
supposed to laugh, and you're most certainly not supposed to laugh. In Scientology, of course, it's called joking and degrading. If you make any kind of comment about Hubbard or Scientology that might
Mm-hmm.
be taken as
Mm-hmm.
risible in any way. And to realize, as you say, the profound importance of going, this is how I feel. And it may
Mm.
be a physiological feeling, the butterflies in the tummy when
Mm-hmm.
the blood is rushing from your organs to your muscles so that you can get into fight or flight. That's a
Mm-hmm.
physical feeling,
Mm-hmm.
panic, fear.
Mm-hmm.
Then there are the emotional feelings we have of liking and disliking and regaining
Mm-hmm.
ownership and saying,
Yeah.
I do, in fact, feel angry. It doesn't mean I have to be horrible to anybody, but I feel
Mm-hmm.
indignant about this thing that's happening, and I have the right to express that. And
Yes.
in a good relationship, what happens is that the person you're expressing it to may feel angry about you feeling angry, and you may have a complex conversation. But in
Oh
a good
yeah.
relationship, you will talk about how you feel rather than attacking the other person, rather than the status thing that you talked about earlier, where, I will defeat you in conversation to prove that my status, I was abused much more than you were abused, and therefore I am whatever status that offers to somebody. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
it's a very important point to make.
Mm. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy to take that risk also to share
Mm,
emotion when you've been publicly shamed for it, when you've been called weak for it. Um, I think, while I am a champion of women's causes, I do
mm,
think that men suffer so much by not being given opportunities to
yeah.
have feelings, to have the language of emotion, to be able to share, to be able to cry
Mm,
without someone saying, "Why are you crying?" or "Stop crying." Uh, and so I think that, yeah, men have a really hard time with that. I think especially
mm,
being able to have emotion, and also just with society around us and around them, it's still, there's still pretty much of a prohibition around it. But I do think that, cult leaders and manipulative partners are the most emotional of anyone there. And so I think they're trying to hold themselves together at any given moment. And so I think they need everyone to just be
mm,
chill and be happy so that they can stay calm, so they can stay happy with themselves, so that they don't, self-destruct,
mm.
basically.
Yeah,
Interesting.
I mean, in interviewing many people who knew Hubbard um, from his birth onwards, it became very evident that he was extremely emotional.
Mm,
I think he'd probably been diagnosable with bipolar.
mm,
In my recent book, I've dedicated a chapter to looking at his psychiatric health, having talked with
mm,
a variety of experts. Um, But so many people over the years, his girlfriend in 1950, who he was cheating on his second and bigamous wife with, keep up, um, she said, and she went on to qualify as a therapeutic psychologist.
mm,
She said that while he was writing the book Science of Survival, which he started there, he was drinking a bottle of whiskey a day and would spend days, sometimes as much as 4 days, in bed, unwilling to get up and he'd be sat there going, everything I've done is a waste of time. This is complete nonsense, which, there was a certain truth to. You then
mm-hmm,
wind forward to when he was hiding from the French courts in 72, 73. He was in hiding in Queens, New York. And Jim Din Kelsey, who also later qualified as a psychologist, was with him and said, he'd have these terrible fits of despair. I talked with John McMaster, the
mm,
world's first real clear, who was very close to Hubbard in 65, 66. And he'd say, when John came off the stage to a rousing applause, he'd go to Hubbard afterwards, and Hubbard would be sat in the corner of his office crying that McMaster had been acknowledged in this way. And then at the very end of his life, in Going Clear, Lawrence Wright, and I like Lawrence's book. I'm not keen at all on the documentary Going Clear, but it's another matter. But the book is excellent. He it There's a guy called Serge Fouth who was with Hubbard at the end, and Hubbard asked him to make an e-meter that would kill him so that he could escape all of his body thetans. And he again
Wow.
made the statement, I failed. I've not managed to do anything with my life. So you've got this, and I think it's quite often the case with
Hmm.
depressed people, that they need to exert some kind of power and control on the environment to feel they exist. With narcissists, of course, they need adulation because they don't really have a constructed self. They don't have any trust in
Right.
themselves. And so, as long as other people applaud them, they exist. And otherwise, they're vulnerable and they collapse. So,
Mm.
that amount of emotional control, and again, you can look at any of the significant cult leaders, and they control the emotions of the people around them. A little bit further on, page 170, I love this. It's called the Reclaiming Joy Inventory. That idea of helping people, because to me, joy in life is the essential. I am very,
Mm.
very lucky. I grew up in a household where, my mum, when the first daffodils came out at the beginning of March, would dance the Gay Gordons or do the Highland Fling, as it's wrongly known, because she was so full of this. Her maternal family, I as a child was very shy and was not at all keen on adults, horrible things, noisy things. But I loved going to see my grandma, and there might be
Mm.
six of my, she was one of 11 children. There might be six of my great aunts and great uncles. And from the youngest age, this was a room full of people who were joyful. There was no anger in that room ever. They loved each other and they'd got all sorts of shared jokes. So one of them would suddenly go, oranges, and the whole room would start laughing about whatever this. I never did find out what the oranges was about, but
Huh. Mm.
so I feel really privileged that I grew up in a
Mhm.
household where joy was not only permitted but encouraged. That
Mhm.
we weren't just allowed to experience it; it was considered a good thing. I think so many people grow up in, if you obviously if you grow up with an alcoholic or a drug addicted parent, there's very little joy in your life.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
learning how to claim or reclaim joy, I think is remarkably important.
Mm. Thank
Ah,
you. Yeah. Yeah. It is, the whole idea of, laughter is the best medicine. I don't know if it's the best, but it is very, very powerful
mm,
and it is very important. And when people say to me, I feel like someone I love has gotten involved in something that is worrying me, and I'll ask what the signs are, and sort of it's hard to detect, but something is off, and
mm,
I'll ask, have they stopped smiling?
yes.
Um, and have they
Or
stopped
can't they stop?
laughing?
Or can't they stop smiling? That's the other
Or
one.
can't they? Right, right, right. That's true. Right, right. Yes. Are they detached from everything and they're
Mm,
just in this sort of strange state? But will they refuse to laugh at your jokes if they used to? I mean, maybe your
yeah.
jokes have always been bad, right? So, maybe they always refused. But if there's a change, um, is it, could it be that now they're involved in something that is is of the utmost importance and there's no time for this frivolity,
Mm,
um, et cetera, et cetera. Right. It's self-important message.
mm,
And, and I think, yeah, there's something really lovely about feeling joy. I'm so happy for you that you had that experience,
mm,
that you got to be around family that was so naturally joyful, as something went very right in the way that they were raised, or their DNA, or a little bit of both.
mm,
But that is terrific
mm,
because taking a moment to appreciate the daffodils to anything else, um, and as you do, the photos that you send that you attach along with your emails of, some beautiful flower or vine. Um, it's a really important thing to do. It also is very grounding,
mm,
because it takes you out of your head and has you notice the person in front of you who is smiling at you, the beauty and nature around you, it helps you feel a part of things. It's a link. Um, but it also, I think, is important for you to see it as as important as other things. That it's not a waste of time as it's going to be portrayed in cults and in relationships with people again who have such a sense of self-importance that I mean, I think they there's no time to waste because you have to spend time adoring them or getting their message out. But I also think that people with very fragile egos are very worried about people laughing because they do think or they worry that they're being laughed at. And so they're going to take all the laughter out just in case to preserve their own fragile ego.
Yeah, absolutely. And um, th- I think money is a very interesting part of it, that there are people who are so eager to earn money that they have no time for any pleasure in life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we don't need to name names. We know all the billionaires. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then there are people who are so eager to make money that you can't have any pleasure in life. You have to serve them. And that's called slavery. And that whatever
Yeah.
tends towards that, where, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you stop believing in the value of every human life, you know,
Mm.
that, that, and it gets to the point where the only human life that's significant is your own. And I some years ago, and I've said this often enough before, I believed in Buddhism for 40 years. All the way through Scientology, I still considered myself a Buddhist. I didn't have any contact
Mm.
with Buddhist temple after I joined Scientology. I didn't go back
Mm.
to it. Um, but eventually, about 12 years ago, I gave up on the idea of enlightenment. I no longer
Okay.
believed in reincarnation, so what was the point? But it happened in a moment. I can even remember where I was at the time. I was in the village here and walking. I kind of went, no, the important thing is my relationship with other people. Nothing else matters
Mm.
as much as that. If I do the
Mm.
best I can for others, then some of them will do the best they can for me. And we will manage somehow, we will go forward. Whereas this kind of pinnacle, icy pinnacle of enlightenment, where I was
Mhm.
somehow going to be wise and blissful, it doesn't happen. I'm yet to meet
Right.
anybody who's actually achieved this. And I've met a lot of people who think they have. But to be in relationship, to be able to communicate with other people, to be concerned about other people's needs,
Mhm.
that's a lot of what helps recovery. I
Mhm.
think we should take pleasure in the world. I'm certainly not puritanical. I'm a follower of Epictetus, the Greek philosopher, but more so of Zhuangzi, the great Taoist philosopher, which is a kind of Epicurean stoicism. It's not just stoicism where you deal, it's take pleasure out of life. So I do eat
Mm.
85% dark chocolate, and even my dentist says it's good for me. So it can't be all that bad. But I also am confident that happiness as such comes from the
Mhm.
sense that you've helped somebody else, or that you've shared something with somebody else. You've played a piece of, you've played Prokofiev's second violin concerto to somebody and they've never heard it before, and they go, "Wow, that's incredible!" And it is incredible, by the way. That you've been able
Right.
to bring a little light to make people feel better, and
Mm.
that gives me, at the age of 70, more satisfaction and contentment than I ever had in the rest of my life. That
Mm.
the last few years of my life, partly because I'm in a fantastic marriage, that helps too. So we've
Yes.
been together for what, 5 years now. That
Yes.
really does help. But that I'm not bothered about going to heaven. I'm not bothered about reincarnating. I'm bothered about now. And I'm bothered about, is there
Mhm.
something that can be done that will make the world a better place and more fun to be in? So I can't build mosques and cathedrals
Mm.
and synagogues. I would if I could, So I paint pictures instead and have
Uh-huh.
conversations with lovely people like you. So
Oh, sweet. Very sweet. No, you do so much, and you know the amount of research that you do and uncovering things. And I know I've mentioned this before in my conversations with you, but connecting ideas, noticing our history, where it's leading us, being able to have, to a certain degree, kind of a crystal ball, kind of have
mm,
a sense of where things might go. We don't know. I mean, the landscape is changing so rapidly, but still, yeah, human beings are human beings, and seeing racism rearing its head, anti-Semitism coming, springing back in a way that I didn't think was going to happen during my lifetime.
mm.
Um,
And
Part of
Islamophobia on the other side of it, you know, that
Islamophobia, all of it, all the hatreds, the very, I mean, it's so destructive and dangerous and kills people, but it's also at its root so juvenile.
mm,
Um, and the I'm better than you. I mean, really, that
mm,
can we just get past that? Can we just start thinking about other things?
mm.
Um, but I think for some people, they really are stuck. They're stuck on that, and then they make it everybody's problem. But I just need for them to grow up. And I wish that also the system were better at safeguarding us from those personalities, which we've noticed over the last couple of years here in the United States too. There really isn't a system in place,
No, and
which has been disconcerting.
yeah, the system which should have been robust hasn't proved to be. And that
Mm,
I think that our corporate world of predatory, plutocratic
mm,
capitalism
mhm,
actually is
mhm,
teaching people to be ever more selfish, and to keep
mhm.
using the word narcissism when they don't know what it means, but ever more selfish and
Yes. Yeah.
self-involved. And
Hmm.
that is about simply growing up. It's about becoming adult. And for me, adulthood is where you take responsibility for other people. It's where you care about other people. You don't, I
Hmm.
don't think you have to sacrifice yourself. I had somebody, he was upset with me because Spike had asked how many subscribers he had on his channel when he wanted to talk to me. And he wrote a great long screed about how I should talk to anybody who wants to talk to me. I'm kind of going, you are kidding me. You know, I've talked with 600 more than 600 ex-members, never charged them a penny for doing it. I've worked on 150 court cases, 250 media pieces, and you're telling me I need to be St. Francis. This sounds like a cult, you know. But I hope he watches this and gets
Yeah.
back to me, and I'd be very happy to talk to him if he does.
Right.
But
Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, that's a very interesting response. Be interesting, very curious to understand about that.
mm,
But yeah, I think that there are a lot of people who have just sort of not grown up and have no interest in it because it works for them to be the way they are. But it only ever just works for them.
yeah,
Also these studies done of these heads of the Fortune 500 companies and the amount of sociopathy that grows as we get higher and higher up the food chain of these corporate ladders, which is very interesting and troubling, but unsurprising. So yes. So I think I appreciate being able to talk about the journal. I am excited about this other book that I've recently put together and the manuscript that I've turned in. And it's a different kind of
mm,
book. It's more clinical, but I wanted to offer, just similar to the podcast, I sort of
mm,
wanted to offer people a chance to just sit and think and listen and reflect and wonder and feel connected to
mm,
themselves, feel connected to other people who are going through similar uh, journeys, but also challenges.
mm,
And the whole you're not alone part of it is so incredibly important. I mean,
Mm.
even with social media, if I see a meme where someone says something that I've been thinking for years, it is so nice. I think, oh, good. It's not just from my crazy mind. Like other people actually really do have that same thought.
Mm.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, as a
And
sense
so
of
it really is,
community. Yeah.
it's important.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Fantastic.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah,
as ever, lovely talking with you, Rachel. We want everybody to now rush out and buy a copy of the book. The description will
yeah,
be put by Spike below this very video. And
great,
do reflect
great.
in the comments on how you feel about that. And we will try and respond to those comments.
Oh, it would be lovely. Yes. Oh, I love Spikes. Please say hello to Spike. Um, and one of the most creative minds out there. One of just I wanted to let people know too that I'm able to get. I found this out before printing on Amazon, but I'm able to get books in bulk also if you want
Mm,
for your organization, and you need a larger shipment. I can do that personally, not through Amazon, but on my own. Just let me know.
great. Okay.
Okay. All righty.
Thanks so
Good,
much,
good,
Rachel.
good. Lovely to talk to you. Thank you
As
so
always.
much.
Thank you. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.